Hello and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here with my two co-hosts.
I'm Jeff Poole.
And I'm Joe Lalo.
And we've got a guest for you this week, good guest, Holly Evans. She's doing LGBT Urban Fantasy and actually paying some bills with it. So we're going to be talking about, kind of what you can do when you're in more of a niche genre. But let me read your little bio first, Holly. Holly is an urban fantasy author with an unhealthy fascination with blades, a deep love of hellhounds, and would love to. Oh my goodness, I should just have you read your own bio. And would love one day to wake up as a fae. When she isn't wrangling rogue characters and trying to tame her muse, she's researching shiny new ninja moves. During her spare time, she fights crime and rights wrongs on the streets of County Kerry. Hello, Holly. Sorry for mangling that. It sounded good on the page.
I've never read it out loud, so...
That's one of the things with being a writer. Like, you can be really clever, and then you realize you have to pronounce things. Although you didn't actually have any hard words in there. I managed to stumble over a bunch of little short words strung together.
That's okay. It's the norm.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're calling from, because it's a little dark where you are.
I'm an English expat currently living in Southern Ireland. I lived in Prague for 5 years before that, and I write LGBT Urban Fantasy, which probably wasn't the best business move, but here we are.
Yeah, I do think there's like an audience out there for a lot of the niche genres, and it's really cool that with self-publishing and the Kindle and all the ebook readers that like you can find those people now. And a lot of the niches that traditional publishing kind of ignores because they feel like the audience isn't big enough. You can kind of swoop in as an indie and take advantage of there being a little less competition and an audience that really wants the books that are tailored to them. All right, well, why don't you tell us a little about what your road to publishing was like?
I feel like authors normally have this nice, long, poetic path about how they always wanted to be an author, except I actually started out as a writing instructor and kind of got pushed into fiction. So I started out writing urban fantasy because that's what I naturally write. I kind of took a detour into erotica to learn how publishing worked. And then I wrote my first almost to market urban fantasy, which didn't have a very likable protagonist, and I ended up having to cut that series short. And then I started on the LGBT thing by accident. I wrote the first 4 chapters of Stone Link and then went back and wrote the previous series, came back and realized when I looked at the way the character described other male characters, there was quite a vast difference, and kind of had a moment of, wait a second, he's gay. And then the next series had a bisexual protagonist, and then I was kind of on a path by that point. So now they're all mostly gay with a couple of bi, and I think that about brings us up to date.
It's always nice when your characters kind of tell you something along the way that you didn't realize from the beginning.
Yeah, you don't always appreciate it, but it usually works out for the best, I think.
What did you do with the erotica? Was that kind of a pen name that you were just tinkering with?
Yeah, I had a couple of different pen names. I had one strictly on Kindle Limited, one that was wide, just to get a feel for how the various publishing paths worked and how marketing worked and how cover art worked and all that sort of thing before I started properly. And
did you learn anything groundbreaking that helped you with your first book that you published under your name or whatever name, if that is your real name?
Not really. It gave me a bit of confidence. I had some understanding, but nothing that I couldn't really have picked off keyboards, to be honest.
And it looks like you just kind of published your first books in like 2016, so you haven't been doing it for too long. And urban fantasy is a pretty competitive subgenre of fantasy. What's your experience been like with trying to break in?
It's definitely very difficult. It's a very packed genre. It's got even worse over the past year, but I got lucky. I happened to talk a bit to SM Ryan on Twitter, and she's a pretty big name in urban fantasy. So when I was talking on Twitter about my Tattoo Magician series, she said, wow, I love it. Can I have an ARC? And after an hour of fangirling and finally calming myself down, I said, of course, I'd love to give you one. And she recommended it to her fans, and that helped me get a foothold. And from there, I could start building something. But I don't know if I could have got quite where I am without that.
It's always helpful when if you can get on somebody's radar like that. I remember, I think Ilana Andrews mentioned one of my books on her blog one day, and unlike me, like thousands of people read her blog, so it was a free book, but I remember I was like, wow, the downloads really spiked that day.
It definitely makes a big difference.
All right, Joe, do you want to hop in?
Sure. So it seems like you were at least marginally aware of sort of the publishing landscape. Like you mentioned that you had a book that was mildly to market, and you had been teaching writing. So when you started to launch into urban fantasy, did you have a notion of how much of a challenge it would be to break out in the genre?
Not really. I think like a lot of pretty new authors, I had kind of airy-fairy ideas of, it'll be fine. It's to market. I have a nice cover. I haven't made all these mistakes all those other people have made. And then, of course, it was far more difficult because the protagonist wasn't particularly likable, and I didn't have the promotional budget to really throw behind it. And I learned a lot over the past sort of year, 18 months.
And so, like, at any point, did you feel like maybe you should like move away from urban fantasy, or was urban fantasy more of like just the natural for your writing style?
I don't think I could reasonably write anything else for a long period of time. I've looked into things like space opera and maybe paranormal romance, but I just can't sustain them for more than about 3 months. I burn out and I can't face it anymore.
It's interesting, like you talk about how your characters are making decisions about what they're going to do. It's like, as an author, you don't even really have that much control over where anything is going to go. You're just sort of, oh, well, it turns out an urban fantasy came out of me, so I guess I'm going to work with urban fantasy. It's amazing how in a job where your job is literally creating worlds, how much of that creation seems to be under its own control.
It's kind of absurd, and you don't really realize immediately, I don't think. It kind of takes a little bit to sort of sink in.
Okay, so for those that might not be aware, could you describe what tropes should be included in the in an urban fantasy novel?
That's quite a long list. How long do you have?
Well, give us the top ones. I say the top 5.
Traditionally, you want a hero or heroine that is special in some big, very rare way. They should be hiding from something like the council or the order or whatever you want to call it, and they should be rare. They're quite often working as a mercenary or an investigator, so that just gives them something, a bit of a general day-to-day income, but they're usually on the lower end of the income scale. They tend to be kind of poor. There will usually be a sibling or a friend that they're kind of looking after. They're lower on the magical scale, but they don't realize the protagonist has magic, or they only know they have a little bit of magic. Obviously, the urban setting where it can be split. Most of the time magic is hidden, and there'll be some explanation for it. There's some spell that stops humans from seeing it or something. Or in the rarer cases, you just have a full magical world. I think they're probably your top ones.
And so my question, and next inevitable question, do you follow those tropes?
I mostly stick to those big main ones. My characters tend to be snarky, which is another key one, but then I go off track, and that they tend to have trust issues, and they're not necessarily wanting to be heroes. They tend to be a little bit more reluctant, whereas traditionally they want to be a hero. They want to save the day. They have that drive.
You mentioned before with Lindsay that you heard, or you noticed a lot of people making mistakes. You didn't want to make those same mistakes. Now, out of curiosity, what are some of the common mistakes you've seen people make?
In general, or in urban fantasy specifically?
So let's go with urban fantasy. Just urban fantasy specifically.
I think they can try and not step out of the boxes, and they'll tend to be a little bit too, almost like the D&D way of looking at it. So they'll have the tropes, but they don't make their own spin on them. So there's nothing that makes them stand out. And they tend to struggle with the voice quite a lot, I think, because it's all very fine saying you need a snarky hero, but actually getting that snark down on the page without it coming across too strong or too much like a petulant child can be more difficult than it sounds.
Every time we have someone on that does urban fantasy and tells us the tropes, I'm like, yep, that's why mine didn't do that well, because I didn't have any of those things in my story. But you learn. And let me ask you, are there any tropes specifically for kind of the LGBT, I guess, fantasy in general that people are expecting, or is there been little of it enough published by the kind of the mainstream that you can be free to explore and do what you want?
The LGBT stuff tends to be very, very romance focused. At the moment, that's where you'll find most LGBT fiction is in various forms of romance. So a lot of the readers come into it expecting a strong romance subplot. They also tend to expect pretty explicit sex scenes. So if you're really, it's too new of a genre to step outside of the main urban fantasy tropes and say this is LGBT urban fantasy versus main urban fantasy.
Okay, and you mentioned, I think when you emailed me, that it's kind of an up-and-coming market with a lot of potential. What do you think, or what makes you think that?
There's a lot of call for more diversity right now. People are talking a lot more about LGBT as a thing, and there's a lot of call for people saying, I want to be represented in these books, I want to see myself. And I get a lot of emails from readers, from gay guys who are so happy to see themselves as the hero in this story. They say, you know, romance is nice, but it's nice to see myself as a magician or a treasure hunter or an investigator or whatever. There's just this call to see themselves in these books.
Do you have any challenges, like if an author wanted to write a story with a gay hero and was not gay themselves, do you feel like you need to have that? The answer I'm going to assume is no, since you're probably not a gay man, but we're not asking, we don't know for sure, it's okay. But how important is that for realism, or do you think it's just like a woman writing a male character, you just put it and get your head around it and you can do it?
I think a lot of people get hung up on that side of things. They think that you need to have an understanding of the LGBT community and get these little bits of nuance and stuff, but they kind of forget that we're people, you know, we have these quirks just like everyone else, you know. It's like Darcy, my gay character, okay, he's gay, he's into guys, but he also loves elven wine and action movies and cherry pie. You know, they're just as important. So if you build them like you would any other character and you remember to give them nuance and details and depth, then I think you'll be okay.
I would think one of the cool things with fantasy too is that you can kind of build your own world and you don't necessarily need to have it be really reflective of whatever, the San Francisco LGBT community, right? You can make your own world up.
Yeah, two of my series, Inkborn and Hidden Alchemy, are set in a whole new magic-packed world, and it is so much fun just to create everything. And I think the hetero people are something like 1% of the population in that world, but it just works. It's amazing. It's so much fun to play with.
All right. Now, one of the things I'm always curious about, like, what qualifies something as like LGBT fantasy? I'm going to screw up that acronym like 5 times over the course of this. But it's like, is it as simple as having protagonists and romantic pairings reflecting the full gender spectrum, or does it have to be like, does the LGBT have to be central to the plot?
There's a lot of argument on that, and there's probably a lot of politics involved. But as far as I'm concerned, as long as the protagonist is LGBT and that's clearly on the page, then that's good enough. I mean, it's one thing saying, hey, they're gay, but then not showing any interest in guys whatsoever, then you can be like, well, how do we know he's gay? How do we know you're not just using this label to try and sneak into the niche and make more money?
Yeah, that's a thing that I think of a lot, is like there is value in labeling something as LGBT, but there's also danger in appearing as though you're trying to exploit that as just a marketing tool. And that's why I wonder, like, I have a book, actually it's coming out at some point, I don't know, it's being edited right now, but two of the characters are LGBT. It happened naturally, as again the characters sort of made that decision on their own, but they're two characters in an ensemble cast, and I feel as though it's probably not enough. I mean, there's certainly main characters, but I don't know that I would actually label it as that. It sounds to me like I could get away with it maybe, but probably shouldn't.
From what I've seen in forums and such, generally you need the protagonist to be clearly LGBT for people to be happy.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess I want to say also, as you say, like on the page, it should be clear on the page. But you said that one of the tropes, particularly for this subgenre, is that it be, shall we say, explicit on the page. If you apply that label, are you likely to get people who are disappointed if you don't go as deeply into details in your love scenes as other books in the genre may?
I write completely fade to black. All my books are just all fade to black. And I haven't had any complaints that I can recall. I've actually had some go the opposite way. Other people have said, well, I wouldn't normally read gay fiction, but actually, you know what, I liked this. And there was no explicit sex scenes to, put them off. So you might get a little bit of pushback from the readers who are coming at it from the paranormal romance end. But I think if they're coming in expecting a cozy mystery or whatever, then you'll be okay.
I'll admit that I didn't know too much about the nuances of including an LGBT character in a novel, so I did what anyone would do. I Googled it. I found quite a few sites mentioning the same thing you did, which is the whole romance aspect of it. And quite apparently the big puzzle is the question, how much is too much or not enough? So my question to you is, how did you handle the amount of romance amongst your characters? Like too much, not enough? I mean, it's explicit? I mean, I was just kind of curious.
I tend to naturally write pretty low romance. That's just the way I lean. So, I mean, if you break it down in percentages, I think about 15% of the overall plot is looking at the romance and that sort of development. There's enough to show, he's really interested in the other guy, and this is the progression of their relationship. Okay, back to, the crime boss plot now.
It's kind of interesting that the romance does seem to be expected when just urban fantasy in general, I would say, sometimes you would expect there to be a romance maybe over 8 books or something, but it might not necessarily be real key to the series. Do you feel that trope of is there a lot of you got to explore them finding their own identity, or is it okay to do somebody that's already got it figured out and the romance is just sort of not there or slowly develops?
All of mine, they've all known exactly what they are. They're completely comfortable with their identity. So that does seem to work. I think the romance thing is where a lot of urban fantasy readers aren't entirely comfortable or used to the idea of LGBT protagonists. So a lot of the sell-through is coming over from those people who read the LGBT romance. And so they're coming to expecting that sort of thing.
Have you played around with I know there's an LGBT tag category on Amazon, and I imagine it's easier to rank in there than in the general urban fantasy category. Do you feel that's true? Do you think that are you finding the right people that way, or I guess how important is it to label your stuff and put it into that category?
I put my books in there to try and make it clear, because I made the mistake with my Alchemist series of not making the blurb clear enough that it was LGBT and it was a bisexual protagonist. And so my first review was a 1-star complaining about the lesbian relationship. So I try to make it very clearly labelled, and I put it in the LGBT category with just saying, this is what this is. Please don't 1-star me because they happen to get together with someone of the same sex.
All right, now continuing on the thread of the LGBT characters, I know a lot of writers probably would like to add an LGBT character as like a background or supporting element to add flavor because they are a type of person, and we should have these types of people. But I would imagine this can often come across as a token inclusion if it's done poorly. Is there a trick to being inclusive without making a character feel like a gimmick or a stunt?
I think it's just a case of treating them like every other character and make sure that they are completely fleshed out and you don't just lean on stereotypes and cliches. You know, you don't want the big flamboyant gay or whatever. Just make them like every other character and make sure they do have a history and interests and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's funny too because in situations like this, it's like, well, you know how there are other types of people? Just do it the way you did with the other types of people. Like it's just a type of person. So it's funny how, and again, like it's telling that like there are subgenres. There's tags you can put on the page for it. It's a curious stage in, I want to say, well, society in general, but literature in particular, since that's the purpose of our show. So it's funny how, like, I guarantee, and if this show is still running in 4 years, if I go back and listen to myself and the questions I came up with, like, boy, that was a strange thing to say. So it's a curious world right now.
It's certainly changing quite quickly, I think.
Okay, I've heard it's hard to write fiction for the LGBT community, seeing how they're so incredibly diverse. Did you have any trouble avoiding the stereotypes which can undermine a character's development? I mean, for example, a feminine gay man or a masculine lesbian or whatnot. I mean, did you have any problems when you were actually defining your character?
I guess I kind of cheated in a way, given that I'm bi and most of the people around me are LGBT. So my best friend's gay, so I could just turn to him and say, hey, so this works, right? And he'd be like, yeah, that's fine. I have a guy I know that's just like that. So I already know all of these people and I grew up around an LGBT community. So it was just pretty natural for me.
All right, well, we're going to kind of move on to some marketing questions that could probably apply to any niche, but thank you for answering all our questions specifically on this. I think Joe's right. In a few years, people will be like, why was that even a thing that you were even talking about? Like the millennials, they don't care. They've got it figured out. It's like the older generation where we're like, we're still not sure because we didn't grow up with so much openness. But I think it's great that people are writing all this stuff. Like I said at the beginning with indie publishing, you can just publish whatever in whatever niche you want. You don't have to worry about, is it marketable enough? Is there a big enough audience? And I think it's really cool that you're making good money by doing a pretty small niche, I would say. Although I could be wrong, like you were saying, maybe it's the next up and coming thing. But it looks like from Mark, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I certainly haven't found many other people doing it yet, so.
I've known lots of people that do it, but I feel like we're still kind of waiting for someone to really break out and to be like, this is the top 20 in urban fantasy and stuck there for 6 months. And I don't know if that's about the readership or just the book hasn't yet been written by, that appeals to like a really big audience. I do think that a lot of people get scared when they see that, oh, it's in the LGBT category, so, oh, it's probably not for me. So that's why I was asking you the question, like, have you ever thought about not categorizing it and just letting it be the story it is? But I've got the pen name that does some more interesting stuff. And I know that people expect certain things in some categories and they're disappointed if they get it, or they're disappointed if they got something extra that they didn't expect.
I have had quite a few reasonably big name authors go, why are you labeling it like this? You're shooting yourself in the foot. To which my response is, if I don't, then I'm going to have readers complaining saying, oh my God, they're gay guys. I don't want to read about gay guys. And then I get 1 stars and then my sales drop off. So if I label this really clearly, then at least people go into it knowing what they're getting.
And there's always the perk that those categories aren't as competitive. So it can go both ways, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. It's always nice having a bestseller tag.
Exactly. I've seen people take the tag that are like Joe was talking about. We're like, oh, 1 of the characters out of 8 is gay. So I'm going to get in that category so I can be a bestseller because it's less competitive. All right, but from the marketing side of stuff, it looks like you're kind of bucking the trend and not enrolling your books in KDP Select and Kindle Unlimited. Have you tried it both ways, or are you just determined to be wide and be less reliant on Amazon?
I was in KU up until the end of December, but I talked to some LGBT romance people, and I had a lot of trouble with the page read issues last August. And I just decided that KU really wasn't the place for that fiction. The readership just isn't there. The readership is wide. And, everyone says when you go wide, expect to drop to 20, 30% of your income. It takes a year to build up. But I'm actually earning more now wide than I was in, September, October in KU. So it's working out really well.
Yeah, it's good to hear. And it does seem to be the case that there can be an amazing amount of difference in audience for just even minor subgenre changes. I'm wide as well, and I've found that like steampunk for some reason does way better on iBooks than any place else, and sci-fi seem to do a lot better on Barnes and Noble. Like the way that the audiences find their books varies phenomenally. But you're wide, so do you go wide directly through the storefronts, or do you use a distributor like Smashwords or Drafted Digital?
I'm direct with Kobo and Google Play, and then I use Drafted Digital for Apple and Barnes & Noble. I'm considering using my husband's old MacBook to go direct with Apple, but given that I'm English, I can't really do direct to B&N.
Yeah, you doing that mostly for, like, would you go directly for the increased control or just the larger royalties? Like, what's the appeal to it?
A bit of both. I like having control, and the Kobo in-house promotions are fantastic. I don't know of any other, equivalent way of getting to Kobo readers like that. And I've heard that Apple can favor people that are direct. So that's why I'm leaning towards moving direct with them as well.
Kudos for you for not enrolling with a certain 3 letters. I won't mention them just in case they're listening. If you don't mind me asking, though, what does your typical launch look like? I mean, what sort of preparation do you do?
These days, I don't really do much now that I'm wide, to be honest. I tend to do a couple of AMS ads. I might do some BookBub CPC ads, and I'll send out a newsletter, and that's about it. When I was in KU, I did all of the, ENT and Book Barbarian and all of that to try and get higher up the ranks. But now that I'm wide, that isn't such a big deal, so I can just take it a little bit slow and spread things out. So it's far more peaceful.
You mentioned that it's only been, I think it was April now, about 4 months since you went wide. And I always see on Kboards authors trying to figure out, like, how do I, I've been exclusive with Amazon since the start. I want to go wide. But then they're disappointed because they couldn't get any sales. So is there anything specific you've done to help get things rolling on the other platforms?
I play with BookBub CPC ads quite a bit. And I play with Facebook ads until I realized that Ireland has to pay a 27% VAT on top of all those ads, which was a painful lesson. But otherwise, not really. I think I just got lucky, to be quite honest, and I apply for every Kobo promotion that I can get my hands on.
It makes sense that if it's a niche audience, a niche category in Amazon, it probably is on the other stores too, and there may be even less competition since I think most people right now are going into Kindle Unlimited with their stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if the newsletter helped at all, given I've built that up for, I don't know, I think it's a year now. And the perma-free might have helped a bit, but I can't really pinpoint it. I've been trying so I can capitalize on it, but I just can't quite figure out exactly what clicked.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious after you said that there wasn't that huge of an audience for it in Kindle Unlimited, and so much of KU is either US or UK right now. Like, it's in other stores, of course, but I know my page reads and stuff are a lot smaller in the other stores. I kind of wonder if there's actually a bigger global audience for this niche, like that it's fewer hangups in other countries than there are in the US. I don't know.
I notice on Kobo that I do all right on Australia. And I've started to get quite a few German sales over the past month or so. There have been a few from Brazil as well, which is quite interesting. So I wonder if it is more of an international thing.
Now, you mentioned how you go for every Kobo promotion that you can. Have you found that, like, have moved away from Kindle Unlimited, that you're have you found that, like, other storefronts seem to be a little bit more open to helping the indies directly than, say, Amazon has been?
Kobo has been absolutely amazing. I was very cheeky and I got in touch with them for the launch of my second to last book. And I said, so I've heard that Apple will push a exclusive pre-order, but I'm not, direct with Apple. So if I were to make my pre-order exclusive with you at Kobo, would you push that pre-order? And so they said, you know what, we will do our best. We don't have the thing that Apple does, but we can give you a couple of spots on the blog. So I had 2 blog posts with them in return for an exclusive pre-order, which was, I thought, kind of nice.
Yeah, it's great. Like, I want to say, it's great that, like, Amazon is huge and they have a giant market, but because the other guys are hungry, and because especially if you're coming out of Amazon, so you've got a readership already, but you're new on their storefront. There's a lot to be said to just working with the smaller bookstores, because you can very quickly access an audience that was completely unavailable to you, and they're just so happy to have you. It's a great experience. So I'm glad that I'm not the only one who's had it.
It's absolute night and day trying to talk to Amazon and you get these form letters. And I have an actual specific guy that will talk to me from Kobo. I can't remember what his name is, but it's him every time whenever I email them, and he's so helpful and so friendly. And it's a huge difference.
It's fantastic having a name. It's just like, oh my goodness, you're a person, and you're the same person as last time.
I have been forbidden from commenting on this subject, so I'm just going to jump over to my question. Has there been anything surprising you've discovered with any of the retailers? For example, this retailer typically has fewer sales than the rest, or that retailer has a greater number of reviews, et cetera? Because I heard you mention that all of a sudden you started getting some Brazilian sales in there. I've had a couple of those pop up for, I don't know why, maybe a book club started up a book of mine. I don't know, but I was wondering if you've noticed anything like that.
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I know that Apple seems a little bit odd and quirky, and Google Play is a nightmare with its reporting. But other than that, I can't think of anything in particular that really stands out.
Yeah, because I think the first time I got all my books on Google Play, I was like, okay, well, where's the reporting? And I'm digging, and I finally find it, and I'm like, really? This is the best I can do, this huge company? Although, you know what? I've already proved that, some of the retailers listen, so I probably shouldn't say anything bad about them either, because I'm really going to line myself in the crosshairs here. So I'll shut up now. Over to you, Lindsay.
I think I've told the story about how I was with Google Play for 2.5 years and didn't realize they weren't paying me. I just assumed I wasn't really selling any books there. And then it turned out... Go ahead.
I've given up looking. I'm just going to assume that they'll pay me at some point if I actually make some money over there.
Well, you should check, because I didn't. And they owed me enough. I went out and bought a Jeep last summer. I was like, this is awesome. I never knew all this money was here. And, because it just added up over, like, I don't know, what is that, 42 months or something like that?
It happened to me too, where I thought they were just stupid little junk letters Google was sending me. It's like, hey, you've got some money in here that you need to, like, finish your setting up your bank account linkage, all that. I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. And then one day I decided to look. I was like, wait a minute, they owe me all this money. I went and looked, and Google went, sorry, you didn't respond in time. Finally contacted Google, and they went, oh, okay, darn it, you're there, here's your money. But so it's worth looking into.
Yes, but the reporting, like you were saying, does not make it easy to see if you're making sales or anything. And I had my Gmail account was linked there, which I never checked, so I didn't even get any email that I knew about. But let's move on. I'm curious, you said that you did do a perma-free, and that's usually what I suggest to people for the other stores. It seems to still work to have a free book one. Did you just jump into that from the beginning?
No, I kept the book at full price for, I think it was 2 months, so that was until the end of January, and threw it at BookBub a couple of times. And then after they rejected it, I said fine, and just put it perma-free. So I was kind of hoping to get a 99-cent BookBub first. But then when that didn't work out, I thought, just make it perma-free and be done with it.
Did you do any ads to try to draw attention to the free book one, or did you find that people were finding it on their own?
I did a free Booksy, I think, and I made a big deal of it to my newsletter and had some newsletter swaps. I tried BookBub CPC ads, but it's so hard to make a good ROI on those, I just gave up.
Yeah, that's another one where you can spend a lot of money really easily.
Yeah, it's a little scary.
And you've started a number of series, it looks like, and then you do kind of shorter series rather than like the 8-book epic saga. Is that just because you get tired of the characters, or you just want to try other things and see if other series do better?
The first series got ended early because I had enough of the character and it wasn't selling. I have 2 ongoing series. A third one I'm currently starting. I'm writing that right now. And then the other series I'm cutting at book 3 because it just wasn't selling. So I'm hoping to publish a book about every 3 weeks. So I roll through different series to keep myself fresh and stop myself from burning out, and hopefully approach different audiences as well.
Has launching several book ones kind of taught you anything? And do you have any tips maybe for those who are starting out with new series?
Every series is completely different. Launching Stone Link, the Gay Tattoo Magician, was completely different to the Hidden Alchemy one, which was the bisexual woman. Because that was a different niche, it hit a completely different market, and that fell really flat. So you can use the same marketing methods, but if you're going for a slightly different sub niche or whatever, even if it's within the same genre, be prepared to hit a different readership and take that into account.
All right. So you mentioned how you cut a couple of series short just because of disinterest, or because you're disinterest on your part or disinterest on the reader's part. But like, when you're planning a series, do you plan a certain number of books?
No, I tend to write pretty episodic. So I'll have a vague idea of where they might end up, and then I'll just keep going book by book, and I will plan to have 3 so that I can see the good sell through and see how they respond to marketing, and maybe do a free run on book 1. And then once they hit 3, I will sit down and look at the data and go, you know what, maybe that isn't selling enough and I should just cut it off here.
So do you try to make sure that every book could be a reasonably satisfying conclusion, or do you just sort of not worry too much if there are too many dangling threads?
I try to keep everything as wrapped up and tied up in a neat bow as I can.
All right. Now, it seems like you're writing one book at a time. Like a lot of people, particularly when they have a series in mind, they'll bank a couple of books and release them rapid fire. It seems like that's not the way you do things.
I was supposed to with the next series that's coming up. I had an agreement with my editor, and then I got ill and I'm really impatient. So that kind of went out the window because I hate having polished books sitting there when they could be out earning me money.
Yeah, that's something that you and I share. As soon as a book is done, like I used to have a very long pre-order period, and there are literally times when I was like, the book is done, I have the cover, everything is clean. 2 days is long enough for a pre-order. I've released books suddenly.
That's actually what I did with my next release. It was on pre-order until June, and I was like, but it's finished, and I have the cover, and I have the blurb, and now it's going out on Friday.
Fantastic.
I'm a member of that same club. I can't imagine these people that, oh yeah, I've got 2-3 books in the works. I've got like 2 more to write before I will release them. I'm like, but it's done. I'll just go ahead. I'll release them early before I release them that long there. Okay. Holly, do you maintain a strict schedule when it comes to writing?
No, to be honest.
Word count goals, daily goals or anything? Or how do you, are you like just write however long you feel like it? Then, because we hear from our guests that say like, oh yeah, I'll write as whenever I've got time, the kids aren't bothering me, or I can only write at 5 in the morning or ride on the bus? I was wondering how your schedule looks.
It tends to change day to day because I do a few other things. So, I mean, I do an exchange thing with my editor. I do all of his admin in marketing. So I'll do that first, and then we'll see where my energy levels lie and what time of day it is. I can't really write when the sun's up, as you can tell by the fact that it's currently 2 a.m. and here I am. But other than that, I try and aim for at least 1,000 words 6 days a week. I have to take 1 day a week off, otherwise I will go into full workaholic mode and I will burn out. But other than that, it tends to be go with the flow, see how I feel, and hope to have a book written in 3 weeks or less.
I've heard from people that say that like they can't have any music on or TV on. Some like myself, I need to turn the internet off, or else I'm very easily distracted. I have never heard someone say I cannot write if the sun is up. So that's a new one on me. So that's really cool.
You'd just be in trouble in Arizona if you couldn't write when the sun was shining in your window.
I'd have to write very quickly for the 2 hours of night that you guys get.
Well, it's kind of interesting. Earlier you were saying that there's different sub-niches within the subgenre. And that, have you found that challenging? Because I can see where, like, if you did a gay hero in the first series and then a lesbian hero in the next series, but then the readers are like, I'm only into gay characters, or, like we can't assume that all LGBT readers want to read all types of characters. Has that been a challenge? And do you have any regrets? Like, wish you'd just stuck to like the gay guy, or?
I have the series Hidden Alchemy, which has a female bisexual protagonist, and she does have relationships with both men and women in the books, and people hate it. They hate the relationship she has with another woman, and I was so excited about the story. It was a treasure hunting alchemist. It was going to be Lara Croft and Indiana Jones. It was going to be amazing. And then people are like, but I hate the fact that she sleeps with Erin, and that was it. The series was done. So I definitely have regrets, and I will not be writing another lesbian series or another female bisexual again. That is it. It's either hetero women or gay guys.
Yeah, that's tough, and it's a shame because I feel like women will read gay characters, like straight women, but guys aren't going to come read lesbian characters, or, so it's like I feel like you can find gay fiction out there, but it's really hard to find lesbian fiction out there, and that's a bummer. I think, but maybe someday someone will make it work.
And I've talked to people about that, and they've said that lesbians are very fussy, which really doesn't help, because you're shrinking your readership even more.
Yeah, because as the author, you're scared. Like, if I can't get it right, maybe I should just not touch it.
Yeah, exactly. That's just the point I'm at. You know what? I'm not selling it. It's too stressful. I am done.
I noticed that most of your books tend to be on the shorter side, and I think that's kind of urban fantasy in general. They're often shorter than like the epic fantasy, or even, I don't know, steampunk, some of the other stuff where like 100,000 words might be more normal. And, we had Mark Coker from Smashwords on a few months ago, and he actually mentioned that the best-selling books that he saw through him were like 105,000 words. So do you feel like you're ever in danger of not satisfying people enough, or that a longer book would serve you better, or are things just going pretty well with the shorter stuff?
I think the average urban fantasy book at this point is about 50,000 words, which is where mine sit. And I struggle to write much longer. My attention span just will not allow me to sit down and stick with one plot and one book for more than about 60,000 words. I get to about 30,000 words and I start to get really antsy, and I just want to, sit down and write 12K and get the book out the window.
See, to me, coming from a more epic fantasy background, I have a 55,000 word book that I call a novella, because the rest of the series,
I'll be honest, you call it a short story.
Joe would call it a short story, yeah. Well, that's actually good though, because then you can get them out faster. And
yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm hoping to get out a book every 3 weeks, which would be really difficult if I was writing 100,000 words per book.
Yeah, a book every 3 weeks is an incredible release cycle. And we're talking about how saving up books for rapid release. for a lot of people, saving up books so that you could release one every 3 weeks, like they'd have to save up in order to do that. So it seems like rapid release is what you're already on target for.
Yeah, not quite on target, but definitely getting close, hopefully.
Well, excellent. So you talk about how you would struggle to write up anything much longer than, say, 60,000 words. Let's say that somebody wants to write epic fantasy where they're averaging up toward 100,000, but they find that they write shorter. Do you think that sitting there and trying to grind out and basically get better at writing longer is a good idea, or would you say it's better to adapt to what your writer brain is willing to give you?
I think you have to weigh up the cost to your mental health to the benefit to writing what exactly the genre wants. Is you sitting down and learning to add in more subplots and more detail and whatever else is required to hit the 100,000 words going to stress you out and burn you out too much to be a long-term benefit? How much time and money and energy are you going to lose by doing that? I think is what you have to sit down and consider.
It's true. It's whatever you are able to write easiest is what you're going to write most. And if you are trying desperately to wrestle an unwilling brain into producing something that you think will sell better, you're going to, at the very least, write less of it. So I think you're definitely right with that assessment. I handed it over a little bit early there. So
it's a strange thing. I was like, where the heck did my mouse go? Unmute the dumb thing. But okay. All right. My final question I usually like asking our guests, is there anything you wish you would have done differently since your writing career started? I heard you touch on a little bit on what you probably would answer there, but I'd like to hear it officially from you.
I would either go wide earlier, remaining stubbornly in KU through the August page read debacle and seeing them drop through September and October and everything. I should have gone wide earlier, or really I just should not have written the bisexual female protagonist. I should have just made a hetero and said, you know, enough, go to market and just leave it be.
Well, sometimes you have to experiment a little bit to find out what will work. You never know. You know, maybe you get awards and it's your bestseller, but it is hard to know in advance sometimes for that kind of thing.
And I kind of wrote it for myself. I mean, I'm bi, so having a book out there as a female bisexual protagonist seemed like a great thing to have, and then it just fell flat.
Yeah, I imagine too there's like a feeling of rejection when you base a character kind of off of you. I've avoided that, but I've been contemplating doing a me kind of character, and I've done a couple short stories, but the novel series hasn't been launched yet with that character.
There has been some ranting.
Well, thank you for sharing everything today and answering all our questions. I'm sure some of them were not PC or that's a foregone conclusion. We are what we are, guys.
We try to keep it entertaining.
Nobody accused sci-fi and fantasy people of being like socially adept in any case, any sense of the word.
Yeah, we lack social skills. We know it.
Exactly. I think our audience knows that by now, fortunately. But thank you, Holly. And do you want to plug anything, or what are you working on now? Got anything people should check out?
I have the new release, which is book 2 in my Forge and Blood series, coming out on Friday. And that follows a made wolf shifter. He became a wolf shifter thanks to the brutal blood ritual. And so book 2 is coming out Friday, and book 1 is available everywhere as it stands.
All right, cool. Well, I will share the links to your website and your latest series so that people can check them out. And I don't know if I should share the link to the bisexual series or not. You sound like you regret it. Somebody out there could be listening and they're like, that is the story I've been waiting for.
But we'll just pretend it's not there. We'll just let it lie and quietly die. It'll be fine.
All right. They'll have to go hunting on your Amazon author page to find it. But that is it for now. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for listening, everyone.
All right. Thanks for all the info, Holly. We appreciate you hanging out with us.
So long, everybody.